Welcome to the Sea Files, folks. Jump in the passenger seat, put your harness on. We're about to go for a wild ride. This is the Committee of 300, 4th edition, revised and updated 2006 copyright. Original version was written in 1997 by Dr. John Coleman, former CIA and researcher. Now, he's talking about an organization called the Committee of 300, which is a world organization. It is the Committee of 300 that gave us a new world order, is giving us the Great Reset, all of the things that people are talking about today. And 300 people who rule the world. Now, this was conspiracy theory in 2006. It's going to sound like an article out of the Epoch Times today when I read it. You ready? You strapped in? Let's go. This elite group also calls itself the Olympians. Now, the elite group it's talking about is the Committee of 300. Now, they call themselves the Olympians because they truly believe they are equal in power and stature to the legendary gods of Olympus. Like Lucifer, their god, they have set themselves above the true God, believing they have been charged with implementing the following by divine right. 1. To establish a one-world government, new world order, with a unified church and monetary system under their direction. Not many people are aware that the one world government began setting up its church in the 1920s and 1930s. For they realized the need for a religious belief inherent in mankind must have an outlet, and therefore set up a church body to channel that belief in the direction they desired. In other words, this is a church that puts an emphasis on man rather than God, praises man rather than God, exalts man rather than God. 2, to bring about the utter destruction of all national identity and national pride, embodied in the old saying, pride of face, pride of race, pride of place, which was a primary consideration of the concept of a one-world government, was to stamp out the individuality of all people, going to make up mankind in order to create the masses. We talk about collective groups today, not individuals. Number 3, to engineer and bring about the destruction of religion, and more especially the Christian religion, with one exception, a one-world government concoction of beliefs. Number 4, to establish the ability to control each and every person through means of mind control and what Brzezinski called technotronics, which would create human-like robots, genetically engineered clones, and establish a system of terror that would make Felix Brzezinski's Red Terror mild in comparison. Number 5, to bring an end to all industrialization and the production of nuclear-generated electric power in what they call the post-industrial zero-growth society. Exempted is the computer and service industries. United States industries that remain would be exported to countries such as Mexico and the Far East, where abundant slave labor is available. As we saw in 1993, this has become a fact through the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement, a fact, known as NAFTA. Now, Trump got rid of NAFTA when he was president on the first time around. It has since been upgraded through GATT, G-A-T-T, and the World Trade Organization. Unemployables in the United States, in the wake of industrial destruction, will either become opium heroin, and or cocaine addicts, or become statistics in the elimination of excess population, process we know today as the Global 2000 Report. Is it sounding like a line in the news today? 6. To encourage and eventually legalize the use of drugs. Marijuana is the big legalization at this time. And make pornography an art form, which will be widely accepted and eventually become quite commonplace. I don't think there's a person in America that has not been affected by pornography in one way or the other. As an update, we can cite that by 2004, pornography had moved into mainstream theaters, and in Australia is openly displayed in non-pornographic theaters. This is called reality programming. In Holland, reality took a new step when, on October 10, 2005, live sex and drug taking began to be screened on BNN, the Dutch youth channel, and bringing reality to a new level. Afterwards, there were discussion panels to present different viewpoints. The film was about a 26-year-old Dutch man who goes on a pub crawl, takes heroin in pill form, goes home to try LSD in the presence of his mother, and then find a partner to engage in sexual activity to establish who enjoys the experience more, the man or the woman. I might add that this is part of the long-range penetration interdirectional conditioning programming established by Tavistock in 1946, loosely based on Oswald Spengler's monumental work, Decline of the West, as part of their strategy to destroy Western culture. Now, if you're not familiar with the Tavistock Institute, it's an institute that was set up actually right around World War II, by the intelligence agencies, CIA, and the British intelligence agencies, and later on Mossad, I think, was involved with it. And it was a program designed for mind control. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Part of it had to do with spying, getting information out of spies and so forth. But they began to use it on the general populations, and this is part of that. Number 7, to bring about depopulation of large cities, according to the trial run carried out by the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. If you remember the killing fields of Cambodia, that was Pol Pot. It is interesting to note that Pol Pot's genocidal plans were drawn up in the United States by one of the Club of Rome's research foundations and overseen by Thomas Enders, a high-ranking State Department official. Now, Club of Rome is another way of saying the Committee of 300, another way of saying the Olympians. They're all different names for the same group. It is also interesting that the committee sought to reinstate the Pol Pot butchers in Cambodia and to prevent prosecution as genocidal criminals. Number 8, to suppress all scientific development except for those deemed beneficial by the committee, especially targeted is nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Nations who persist in building nuclear power stations were to be brought down, i.e. Iran. Examples of nations that had to be dealt with were Iran, Argentina, South Africa, and Pakistan. Particularly hated are the fusion experiments, scorned and ridiculed by the committee and its subservient press, the media. Development of fusion torch technology would blow the committee's conception of limited natural resources right out of the window. A fusion torch, properly used, could create unlimited and as yet untapped natural resources, even from the most ordinary substances. Fusion torch uses are legion and would benefit mankind in a manner which, as yet, is not even remotely comprehended by the public. Several scientists have expressed a belief that fusion technology would create new oil resources. Number 9. To cause, by means of limited wars in the advanced countries, a reduction in the number of people called surplus to requirements, and by means of starvation and disease pandemics in the third world countries, the death of 3 billion people by the year 2050. People, Russell's useless eaters, talking about Bertrand Russell, and with the useless eaters comment, let me take you back to what Bertrand Russell said. This is on page 53. All future planning by the committee's institutions would be predicted upon getting rid of 2.5 billion, quote, useless eaters, end quote, to paraphrase Lord Bertrand Russell, a senior spokesman of the 300. Natural resources would have to be allocated under the auspices of global planning. So this was written in 2006, the revised version, fourth edition, and he was already aware of future pandemics and the attempt to get rid of billions of people. So written in 2006, folks. This is pre-COVID. I'll read it once again. To cause, by means of limited wars in the advanced countries, a reduction in the number of people called surplus to requirements, and by means of starvation and disease, pandemics in the third world countries, the death of 3 billion people by the year 2050. People, Russell's useless eaters. The Committee of 300 commissioned Cyrus Vance to write a paper on the subject of how best to bring about such genocide. The paper was produced and Vance presented it under the title Global 2000 Report, to which we have already referred, and was accepted and approved for action from former President James Earl Carter and Edwin Muskie, then Secretary of State, for and on behalf of the U.S. government. Under the terms of the Global 2000 Report, the population of the United States is to be reduced by 100 million by the year 2050. Is your head spinning yet? You got your harness on? Because we're hitting that S-curve right now at a high rate of speed, so you might make sure you hang on, okay? Number 10, to weaken the moral fiber of the nation. Based upon decline and fall of the West, it called for planned decadence with stars, leading the way in demolishing the institution of marriage, sex in the context of marriage, profane language, drug taking, and severely immodest dress styles for women. Now, when it says stars, it's talking about Hollywood stars, right? Movie stars. Some of the leading movie stars, or stars, especially created for this purpose by the social science scientists at Tavistock, remember the Tavistock Institute, were Madonna, Kate Moss, and Britney Spears. Were Madonna, Kate Moss, and Britney Spears, Many of today's so-called stars in the movie business, stage and theater, the fashion industry, talk show hosts of such popular series as Oprah, Dr. Phil, and game shows such as Bob Barker of The Price is Right, Rosie O'Donnell, and Ellen DeGeneres would be unhappy to learn that they are merely the end product of Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, he's a nephew of Sigmund Freud, H.V. Byron Dix, Madeline O'Hare and the social sciences stars at Tavistock. A lot of this stuff comes out of the Tavistock Institute. I have a book back here called the Tavistock Institute. You should buy a book on that and read it because it's an eye-opener. Number 11. As jobs dwindle due to the post-industrial zero growth policies introduced by the Club of Rome, especially targeting steel, shipbuilding, and machine tool manufacture, the report envisaged demoralized and discouraged workers who are no longer employable, relics from the industrial age of America resorting to alcohol and drugs for solace. In the news just this week is Tyson Foods, who is replacing white workers with those who came across the border illegally from other countries, and they're shutting down plants where white workers and just basically Americans of different colors, different ethnicities, but mostly white, are shut down because they're trying to replace white males in the workplace, keep them unemployed and bring the other folks in. This is clearly a plan played out by this committee of 300, according to the book. Now, so they're going to discourage workers who are no longer employable, relics from the industrial age of America, resorting to alcohol and drugs for solace. So, they run to the alcohol, they run to the drugs for their solace. Now, this is what the committee believes would happen. Not everybody does that. Many people are industrial themselves and they find ways to survive, which is not in the belief system of the Committee of 300, because they believe that human beings are just barely better than a chimpanzee, because humans are just only thing humans are about is survival. We're a very base creature, right? They don't believe that we're made in the image of God. They don't believe that there's any influence of God in the world and so forth. So their basic worldview is flawed, and that's why they come up with these flawed concepts. The youth of the land will be encouraged by means of rock music and drugs and later pornography to rebel against the status quo, thus undermining and eventually destroying the family unit. In this regard, the committee commissioned Tavistock Institute to prepare a blueprint as to how this could be achieved. Tavistock directed Stanford Research to undertake the work under the direction of Professor Willis Harman. This work later became known as the Aquarian Conspiracy. 12. We got a few more to go, folks. 12. To keep people everywhere from deciding their own destinies through the application of one created crisis after another and then managing such crises. We're in that situation today, aren't we? This will confuse and demoralize the population to the extent where, faced with too many choices, apathy on a massive scale will result. Since this was written in 1991, the United States has undergone shell shock, resulting in a national melee where even the most unwholesome situations do not arouse protest or concern. In the United States, an agency for crisis management is already in place. It is called the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, whose existence I first disclosed in 1980. Well, everybody knows about FEMA today. There will be more on FEMA as we proceed. Number 13. To introduce new cults and continue to boost those already functioning, which include rock music gangsters, such as the Mick Jagger's Rolling Stones, a group much favored by the European black nobility, which is a subdivision of the Council of 300, according to the book. And all of the Tavistock created rock groups, which began with the Beatles, to encourage, by example of stars, the development of interest in heathen rituals and religious practices such as the cult of Kabbalah. By the early 2005, Kabbalah cults had spread all over the U.S. Shirley MacLaine, Madonna, and Demi Moore were entrusted with the spreads of this foreign quasi-religious practice. Kabbalah groups are mushrooming all over America, but nowhere is the growth more prolific than in Hollywood. You could add, what's the one that the stars involved in so heavily? Was it Christian Science? I think that's it. Anyway, number 14. To continue to build up the Christian fundamentalism begun by the British East India Company's servant John Nelson Darby. This is where dispensationalism comes from, folks. I am not a dispensationalist. I am not a premillennialist, okay? If you're not familiar with that, I will be talking about that more in videos. I'll explain dispensationalism and all of that in more detail, but basically it's a view of the end times that is so popular in the church today. This is a part of the Committee of 300's plans, part of the Tavistock Institute, part of what they wanted to inject into the church in order to gain more control over the church and to derail the church from building the kingdom of God. I'll continue. It has never been explained how Darby, arriving in the U.S., seemingly as a poor preacher, was able to travel extensively all across the land, nor has his mysterious European connections ever been explained. Among these contacts were John Henry and Francis Newman, the Frere brothers, Joseph Wolfe, Lady Powercourt, Carlyle, and the distinctly wealthy banker, Henry Drummond. Certainly these people came from the wealthy, privileged class of England, with strong connections to the wealthy in Europe, from which it is said the Brethren Church came. According to the research of Otto J. Scott, The Secret Six, a very legitimate desire to end chattel slavery was misdirected by 6 wealthy men who had given up Christianity, misdirected into a bloody conflict, the Civil War of 1860s in America, which divided the nation and upset beyond repair relations between the races. Of the Secret Six, it is known that one of them was closely affiliated with the 300. Of the 6, Scott wrote that they remained safely in Boston, having chosen Kansas in the 1850s to test their ideas and push their arms. The Civil War was not spontaneous, folks. It was planned by globalists. The Christian fundamentalist movement was to be a channel for strengthening the state of Israel. Here we go with Zionism, okay? By identifying with the Israel of the Bible and acceptance of the theory of God's chosen people, and by donating very substantial amounts of money to Israel in what they sincerely believed to be a religious cause in the furtherance of Christianity. This view overlooks the fact that modern Israel was founded as a Zionist political state and not a religious state. The Israel of today, 2024, right? 2024, the Israel that's there over there in the Middle East today is not the Israel of the Bible. They are 2 completely different entities. Okay? Number 15, to gender the proliferation of religious cults such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Muslim fundamentalism, the Sheiks, and to carry out mind control experiments of the Jim Jones and Son of Sam type. It is worth noting that the late Ayatollah Khomeini was a creation of British Military Intelligence Division 6, commonly known as MI6, as I reported in my 1985 work. Now remember, he was CIA and a researcher, and he knows this stuff, okay? What really happened in Iran? What really happened, so the work, he reported it in his 1985 work, What Really Happened in Iran. That was the work that he reported it in. Now, this detailed work spelled out the step-by-step process implemented by the United States government to put Khomeini in power. What we have been told, folks, is not true. Most of it's a lie. 16. And we end at 21, so we're almost there. To export religious liberation, ideas around the world so as to undermine all existing religions, but more especially the Christian religion. This began with the Jesuit liberation theology that brought an end to the Somoza family rule in Nicaragua, and which destroyed El Salvador in 25 years of civil war. Costa Rica and Honduras were also embroiled in revolutionary activity, instigated by the Jesuits. In 1991, we saw Nicaragua disrupted, Peru roiled by a guerrilla war, stable rule in Chile overturned, revolution in Venezuela and Argentina brought to its economic knees through war, and Serbia and Iraq utterly destroyed. 17. To cause a total collapse of the world's economies and engender total political chaos. 18. To take control of all foreign and domestic policies of the United States. 19. To give the fullest support to supranational institutions. I'll say it again. To give the fullest support to S-U-P-R-A, not E-R, supranational institutions, such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Court, and as far as possible, cause local institutions to become less effective and gradually phasing them out or bringing them under the mantle of the United Nations. 20. To penetrate and subvert all governments and work from within them to destroy the sovereign integrity of the nations represented by them under the guise of spreading democracy as a bulwark against terrorism. And finally, 21. To organize a worldwide terrorist apparatus and to negotiate with lawful government for their surrender wherever terrorist activities take place, by allowing the U.S. to establish permanent military bases in those nations, which will be carried out under the banner of bringing democracy. I'm sorry, there's 22. I missed number 22. To take control, this is 22, to take control of education in America with the intent and purpose to utterly and completely destroying it through To take control of education in America with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it through graduated change in curricula and teaching methods. By 1993, the full force and effect of this policy was becoming apparent and will be even more destructive as primary and secondary schools begin to teach, quote, outcome-based education, end quote, or OBE. At best, from his school days, the American male is aware that the United States has a 250-year history, but only in the most tenuous sense, and lacking in detail. His knowledge of the Constitution is minimal. He is totally oblivious of the fact that seemingly unrelated incidents and accidents of history are in fact closely related. Engineered and brought about by hidden forces, the French Revolution instigated by two Masonic lodges, the rise of Napoleon, a creation of the Rothschilds, and the Napoleonic Wars controlled by the Rothschilds, Lord Grey's savage, brutal First World War, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the rise of communism were all carefully planned. This bears no relation to the history he was taught at school, which has it that these were unrelated events with no direct connection. He was taught that the great events in the history of the world, including the United States, came from nowhere and suddenly sprang into being as if by magic. There has not been a single occasion when he was taught that these shattering events were created and channeled with great precision and manipulated to bisect with preset goals. The great conspiracy has never been revealed to him, and if by chance it is mentioned, it is derided as the thinking of crackpots. Controlled education does not allow for such studies. It is taboo. The nature of the law of contracts is not known to him, especially political contracts known as treaties, which he is told is the law of the land. Free lawyers understand this is not the case, and so our American believes that events just occur in a vacuum. Were he to have the privilege of entering the great repository of knowledge that is the British Museum, and to spend 2 years reading with intent to study the back issues of the great newspapers of Britain and the United States, the New York Times, the London Times, the Telegraph starting in late 1890, Punch, and the New Yorker magazines of the 1900s, he would be appalled to find himself looking at the most identical political format as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the London Times of 2006. Even more shocking would be his discovery that he was reading the same cliches that he had just read in the old back issues, and they were remarkably similar in design and context, in that they preached the near identical message of communism, a new world order, and a one world government. Let me skip down and do one paragraph on 23. Actually, I'll finish out there. I'm almost done. The language would be a little different. The personalities change over the years, but the tenor and the thrust of the propaganda was the same. If he closed his eyes and reflected on the 1910 paper he was holding in his hands, he would see that it resembled remarkably and unmistakably 2006's news. He would be forced to come to the inescapable conclusion that the intent and purpose was to establish first international socialism and then communism as the predominant systems of a new world order. For there to be such undoubted consistency, there has to be a high degree of certainty that some high-ranking personages and their entities control world events and events in his own country, the United States of America. Delving further into the colonial history of Great Britain, he might even come across the name of the British East India Company, which is a precursor to the Committee of 300. as a power group of the elite who were able to arrange an astonishing array of events. Here's the final thought, and then we'll close out the video. To establish socialism in the United States with the purpose of nullifying state constitutions and the federal constitution. One of the noteworthy events managed by the British East India Company was the establishment of socialism as a political system. The Fabian Society was a product of the East India Company. The Fabian Socialist Society of London, its leaders, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, Annie Besant, G.D.H. Cole, Ramsay MacDonald, Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells, Thomas Davidson, and Henry George, whose mother was the Grand American Liberal Establishment Pratt family of Philadelphia, owned their positions to the company. The Pratt family was closely tied to the East India Company's trade with India, which caused opium wars in China and so forth, but we won't go into that. East India Company's trade with India and held significant financial interests in the Rockefeller Standard Oil Empire. Beatrice and Sidney Webb went on to found the London School of Economics in 1895, through which passed some of the most important figures in British and American politics, business, and government. The distinguished alumni included David Rockefeller, erstwhile president of the National Republican Club, chairman of the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company, and the leading financier of the infamous Institute of Pacific Relations, a British East India Company Committee of 300 spin-off that provided funding for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. A lot of you have said, we think that this attack on Pearl Harbor was pre-planned. Well, so does John Coleman. He was also the mentor of George Herbert Walker Bush and John F. Kennedy. Of interest is Beatrice Webb, the dominant partner in the enterprise. One of three daughters of Richard Potter. Interesting. Potter was the name of the villain in It's a Wonderful Life. A wealthy railroad magnate deeply involved in occultism. She was living at her father's home when she met Webb. Her sister Teresa married Sir Alfred Cripps of the Labor government of Ramsay MacDonald. And the third sister, Georgina, married Donald, Menard Sitzhagen, said best I could, a banker affiliate of the East India Company. Two more paragraphs. Richard Potter, Mr. Potter, had no need to work and spend his time delving into occultism, and was deeply steeped in occult theory and practice. Richard Potter, who had no need to work, and he spent his time delving into occultism and was deeply steeped in occult theory and practice, is believed to be the central character of the children's witchcraft novel Harry Potter. That recently came out of nowhere to become a runaway success, but which we now know was the Tales of Richard Potter, revamped by the Tavistock Institute and then given to an unknown author to write. Wow. Many of the above goals, which I first enumerated in 1991, have since been achieved or are well on their way to being achieved. A special interest in the Committee of 300 programs is the core of their economic policy, which is largely based on the teachings of Malthus, the son of an English country parson who was pushed by prominence by the British East India Company, upon which the Committee of 300 is modeled. That's according to the book. Now, make up your own mind what you believe about all this. But it's fascinating reading, interesting history if you believe it to be true. It explains an awful lot of what has happened to us in the last 5 years. Take a few days to think about it, and we'll see you next time on the C-Files. God bless.